everyone to Two and a Half Gays, the all-inclusive podcast for the modern-day millennial queen. It has been a while. My name is Dino.
I'm Quinlan.
I'm Katana.
So Katana is joining us because JJ is sick this week, unfortunately. Katana, how are you?
I am very well.
The listeners, a bit about yourself.
Bit about me. I can call myself a medical scientist now.
Amazing.
Yes, I think I can call myself that. Been working in the industry for about a year, I would say, like, properly.
Stunning.
I like to read poetry. I'm a bit of a nerd.
Ooh.
I love literature.
Sorry, were you a big fan of the milk and honey phenom?
Oh, no.
No.
No. I'm more of like a Jack Kerouac and T.S. Eliot. I'm like old school. Yeah, very, very old school. I read like those orange paperbacks, you know, all the classics.
Penguins.
The Penguins, yes.
Not to get all literary, but like I can't deal with Jack Kerouac. Like all of the Beat generation, I just find it so dense and it's so hard to get into. That's just me though.
Yeah, it is hard to get into, but I feel like once you get into it, you're like lost in that world and you're like, I don't know. And I just like, there's a lot of like philosophical sort of ideas like embedded in that too. So I feel like modern day literature is kind of lacking in that. But
it's not jumbled together. That's what I really miss.
Yeah.
Well, I like milk and honey because I'm a basic bitch.
Yeah, we know that.
And Quinlan, how are you?
Life has been strange lately. I've been like juggling 3 jobs, including the podcast 4, doing lots of media work and also working at a cafe. So I've spent like 6 hours today, probably more than that, staring at a laptop and doing editing for a film. So I'm a bit delirious.
And I heard a rumor that you were overseas, Quinlan. Is that right?
So I went to Europe for 2.5 months, and it was a big trip around. Basically, it was a big loop, like doing the main countries and the main cities. I didn't go to anywhere obscure.
Favorite place you went?
Berlin or Sevilla.
Worst place you went, or worst experience you had?
Worst experience. The worst place was probably Milan, just because it didn't feel like it was a built-up city. Like, it was kind of like Melbourne, but in Italy. Like, I love Melbourne, but, you know, I'm not going to come to Melbourne to have a fun time. It's just kind of a chill city. And I was all alone in Milan as well. No one was really friendly. There was no one in my hostel who I kind of talked to. So it was like 3 days of me walking around the city and trying to find things to do.
And Milan is known for their vegan food, right?
Oh my gosh, if you don't know, I'm vegan. And there is no vegan food, like in Italy, period. And there was like one vegan pizza shop, and I've traveled 40 minutes to get to it, and it was closed.
So what did you eat
And it was
then?
pouring rain. There was a kitchen in the hostel, so I basically cooked everything.
And Katana, have you traveled anywhere recently?
Recently, well, I'm going on a holiday in a month. I'm going to Japan, which I'm super excited about. But I did Europe last year, over Christmas, and we only did, what did we do? France, Italy, London for like 4 days, and Germany. The Christmas markets were amazing because we kind of chose the countries that would be good in winter because the biggest pain was daylight savings. It would just get dark. We'd check in at 2 and it would be dark by 3.
I went in summer. We had like opposite experiences.
Yeah, it's like sunlight till 10 p.m, right?
Or like later than that. Yeah,
Really?
It was crazy. And like in Spain, it was nuts. I loved it so much.
Wow.
I couldn't handle winter. That's
So their
too cold.
siestas are a real thing.
Yeah,
They take a nap and then they go out later.
Yeah, it's a real thing. It's not as intense as people like think it is, but people actually do.
Yeah.
that.
So it was really fun in winter. A lot of Christmas markets, a lot of glühwein, for anyone that knows what that is. Mulled wine with like spices.
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
a tradition in Germany. It was a good time.
And so you're going to Japan soon?
Yes.
I just came back from Japan.
No way. Oh, you can give me some hot tips.
I will.
Please.
I will.
Did you stay in a monastery or anything?
No.
Okay.
A friend of mine had done that and he loved it, but we didn't do it this time.
We're doing it. We're doing it for 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
It's really expensive. Ideally, I'd love to like spend a week there. But
In the monastery?
yeah, I'm into that stuff. So tell us a bit about Japan.
Japan was wonderful. I was there for 2 weeks with 2 friends from high school and we had the best time ever. The second time I've been like just with friends. It's really like it was the funniest trip ever. But it was awkward because I laugh really loud and so everyone is just constantly staring at me everywhere we went, right? We were like always the odd ducks out. But no, I loved it. We climbed Mount Fuji. We stayed in a bunch of beautiful traditional style houses. So we're all pretty well traveled, it seems.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did we all find ourselves when we were overseas?
Would you like to go first, Quinn?
Yeah, I totally found myself.
Did you found yourself, Quinn?
I'm a different person now.
You-
I eat baguettes every day, only fresh, with vegan ham and cheese. That sounds gross. No, but like, I don't know, on a serious note, like, I've been going overseas. It wasn't about, like, finding yourself. Like, I think the intention for me was to prove to myself that I could be independent. Because all of the previous holidays I've been on overseas were with my family. And even the ones interstate were with friends. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to go overseas. I'm going to do everything myself and prove that I can survive. And I did. And it was a great experience.
And now you're back here recording it. So clearly you survived and thrived there.
I thrived, even though I cried a few times.
But that's travel, right?
It actually is.
That you don't travel well if you don't have a few mishaps.
Yeah.
And did you find yourself when you were overseas, Katana?
I mean, I think that's just the wrong way to go about traveling. Like, you don't go to find yourself, you go to sort of immerse yourself in different cultures and be exposed to different ways of life. I think that's the thing that I took away from my extensive travel experiences, that there's just so many different ways of life. And when you live a certain life, you think that's like how everyone else lives. Like, honestly, that was like an ignorant like, not exactly the same but similar, but there's so many different ways of life and it all works, you know. So that was like my most I don't know, my biggest revelation. Yeah. So I did not find myself, but I learnt a lot.
What do you guys think about when mostly white people go overseas and then they come back and say, I found myself? Similar to like that Burning Man experience where like they go to Burning Man and they spend like 2 weeks in the desert and they're like, I'm a whole new person. What do you think about that with travel?
I think it's kind of silly because a lot of the time those things are triggered by like something bad happening where you are. Like, you might have lost your job or gone through a breakup and it's like, I need to leave and come back. And it's like, well, instead of running away from those things and finding yourself, you should stay here and face them head on. But like, what really annoys me, and I think you all really understand this, is when like people go to India and it's like that white girl. It's like, I'm going to do yoga and like pose with a tiger and become one with the world. But they don't really immerse themselves. They just do the white girl traveling in some country like that and pretend to be Buddhist or something.
God.
For people who don't know, like, Katana's background is
Indian.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to work with a girl that would like come in not every shift, but it would be mentioned like at least fortnightly that she really wanted to go to India to like do the whole eat, pray, love thing, quote unquote. And mind you, I was probably 22 at the time, and she was like late 20s, early 30s. So you'd think and she'd like traveled extensively. So I don't know why she thought that was like an actual thing. She literally would say, I'd love to do the whole eat, pray, love thing. And
I've also heard when people like do those types of things, they're usually not very respectful of the land or for people. What do you think of it, Dino?
Yeah, what do you think of it, Dino?
Of finding yourself or eat, pray, love?
Both are the same thing.
They're really the same thing.
They're the same thing.
I don't know. It's a bit obnoxious. It's a bit pretentious. Like it's always the same types of people who go. 100%. And like you were saying, it's always India or Thailand or Nepal or wherever. It's all the same sets of countries. What exactly are they doing that's like so revolutionary? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like they're probably just praying a bit or like going through like aesthetic.
Yeah.
I have no idea, but
yeah.
And
see, the issue with that is it's really focusing on a very small part of the country that, you know, offers that. There's, for example, I feel like I can talk about this because my heritage is Indian. There's a lot of chaos in India, like poverty, you name it, sexism, all that sort of jazz, child trafficking. They sort of dismiss all these like corrupt parts of the country and just sort of, you know, be like, yeah, India's all like, you know, praying and amazing food and Buddhism and Hinduism and all that kind of jazz. But
because they're not living there.
No.
They're just tourists. And you can't like live or like understand somebody else's experience unless you live there.
100%.
Definitely.
And so, yeah, I don't know what exactly they're doing there.
100%. And the irony will be is that opposite like a retreat centre, there will be like children begging for food and there'll be like, you know, a poverty-stricken...
Like you said, it's about like taking in the culture. Like what can you give to the culture? Like
100%.
your experience, not what they can give to you. Like,
and it's odd that they like just the framing of it, like finding yourself as if there is something for you to be found.
Yeah.
Whereas like, you know, we're all just like works in progress. You know, we're all just like constantly being worked at. There isn't just like a finished version of ourselves somewhere just resting in the Himalayas. If we only just go there, we'll get it. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Like you just constantly just have to slowly improve yourself. And traveling is one way too.
Exactly.
It'll help you become more worldly, but just simply saying, oh, there is a finished version of me somewhere.
Yeah.
If only I could just get to it. It just doesn't.
also using someone else's religion
And once again, it's using someone's religion to go off your point, Quinn.
Yeah.
It's like, I will just take parts of it that I like and that like sits well with me. But
because you have like people who are already Christian or like whatever religion, and they go somewhere like India where it might be Hinduism, and then they're taking part in their religion, but they don't believe in anything.
another thing is a lot of sort of Western spiritual leaders who go to India, Bali, and sort of extract the culture and then monetize on it in the Western world. For example, like the other day in my Instagram Explore page, there was a spiritual leader. Don't know what that even means. And she was like I don't know. She apparently her Insta bio was can help you find love. You will be able to make 6 figures in a month.
Finding love,
and you're able to make you'll if you sign up to a course, you will make 6 figures in a month.
Sure.
Okay.
Anyway, and I was curious and I clicked on it, and on her like the most recent Instagram page was Instagram post. It was about a course that she was offering, and it's called Find Your Hindu Goddess. In Hinduism, there's like not millions, but hundreds of like male gods and female goddesses, and she'd pick like a random 5 goddesses and basically devised a quiz where if you do the quiz, you could find out what goddess you were.
No.
Oh man, that just irked me the wrong way. Especially in third world countries, people use religion and faith as a way to keep hope in such dire circumstances, and then you have these people who travel to those countries for like a week or 2, just steal the culture, then like sort of regurgitate it in a way that it's like palatable to the Western world, and then monetize off it. But if an actual Indian person did the same thing, it's like it probably wouldn't be as, do you know what I mean, successful, because it's palatable to the Western crowd if a white person monetizes off it. So yeah, that's what irks me, and it's like you can't use religion when people are poor and that's like literally their only point of hope to like carry on, and they pray to these gods because they think that's, you know, that things are going to change and things like that. It means more to them, you know what I mean? You can't, it's the same thing when you go into like, I don't know if you guys do yoga, like certain yoga studios that I would go into, like especially when I was living on the Gold Coast last year, I'd go into this, there was like this nice yoga studio, I think it was Burleigh Heads, so like hippie town. I was like, okay, maybe the yoga will be good here. You go in and they just have like Hindu deities and gods, basically, like statues everywhere, run by like white people with like dots on their head. They didn't know anything about the culture, and it was like a trend to them, you know what I mean? And it was, honestly, it was disgusting, because people act like that's their way of life, like certain people, and especially if like, you know, a brown person did something like that, that would just probably not be as cool.
Yeah, people are bullied for that in school and on the streets.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
A lot of that kind of stuff happens. Even when like those women wear those like traditional wedding outfits, and I'm like, oh, like I don't know if that's appropriate or not. Because then if an actual Indian person wore it,
that's the well, that's cultural appropriation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that's my little rant.
And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
On the topic of travel, I know you mentioned this to me. When did you go to India?
End of 2017.
Yeah.
Trickling into a bit of 2018.
Yeah.
So it was a long trip.
Because all of us are kind of, our parents have immigrant backgrounds or refugee backgrounds. Why you traveled back to India? And like it was actually to do more discovery of your culture and your family, like.
And finding yourself.
It's like a legitimate find yourself kind of travel though. Like
understand my background
your
a
roots,
bit more. My
yeah.
roots, exactly. Connect with my roots. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. That trip in 2017, it was the first trip that I'd been back as like, I would say, an adult. So every other time that I'd visited, I'd been quite young. So I think for the first time I was sort of exposed to, I don't know, India through the lens of someone that's like a bit more cognizant, and I think I sort of fantasized it too as a kid, because you don't notice those things as a kid. You do, but you're with family, and this was the first time that I'd also done a lot of solo traveling too. Solo as in with a friend, but not with family.
What was your intention when you were planning the holiday?
Honestly, just to learn about the culture and visit the hometowns of my parents, stay with my cousins who I hadn't seen in a while, and a lot of them were, you know, in their early 20s my last trip that I did, they were in their early 20s and I was probably like 12. And now they're all married with kids, and yeah, just to like spend time with family.
Did you feel a disconnect from your culture because you hadn't been there in a long time, or because you didn't have the same traditions in Australia with your family, or?
Oh, 100%. Look, I think the most defining phrase that I will say is, I think that trip sort of made me realize that I was like too Australian to be Indian. Like, you don't really fit. I didn't really fit in over there because they were like, I can speak the dialect that my family speaks. But they were like, you speak it with an accent. So it's like, me speaking it fluently wasn't, you know, they'd make sort of backhanded comments.
It wasn't good enough.
It basically wasn't good enough. And you don't fully feel like you fit in there. And it's like, it's really interesting because you look like them, and, you know, and obviously I grew up with, my parents tried to keep traditions alive as much as possible and teach us culture and blah, blah, blah. Just felt like I didn't really fit over there either. And it's interesting when, you know, second-gen immigrant experience in Australia also, it's like you don't really fit in here either because it's, you know, it's kind of like, what is it to be Australian? And like the stereotype is white, you know, but Australia really is diverse. Kind of, not sure where I really fit in was like the experience that I had then, but I've sort of figured it out now, I think.
What was like, so going there, like what do you think what was the figuring out process? Like what did you do to? So
I spent a lot of time with family and just sort of, you know, their day-to-day, you know, errands and things like that. I do that. Honestly, just nothing sort of crazy. It was honestly just spending time with family and like sort of interacting with locals. That was a big one. Yeah, there was nothing extravagant that I did. It was just sort of being immersed in the culture.
Yeah, I know. It's interesting because I'm half. So my mum is white and my dad is Chinese. And growing up, I did not like being Chinese at all. I always wanted to fit in with like white people. And even like the Asian kids who were at our high school and in my primary school, I never connected with them because they were it's really like a full blood. That sounds so gross, but like they were fully Chinese, and so they had different upbringings to me. Like
full blood.
Full blood. People say that to me, like, you're half blood, and I'm like, am I a Harry Potter character? Like, but growing up in that environment, because the Asian kids, especially because it's mostly Chinese, the stereotypes were kind of true. Like most Asian parents, Chinese parents, will raise their kids a certain way. So when they were like, oh, you play piano, right, and you get A's in math, and I was just like, no, I like watching like
and Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
It was just weird. I had such different interests to them. And then my dad, mostly in Chinese culture, the mum raises the kids and the dad does the working. So my dad didn't hold on to any Chinese traditions. Like we did Chinese New Year and Autumn Moon Festival. That was twice a year, and it's just like a street festival. It wasn't like anything in depth. And he's not religious, so I didn't learn about Buddhism. And as I got older, I started to regret not immersing myself in Chinese culture, and I never even learned the language because I was bullied in Chinese school for being half. So that didn't work out for me at all.
Isn't that interesting? No, because my parents tried to. So they would. I remember they like enrolled me into like a it's like traditional Bollywood dance in the Sanskrit and stuff. It's like ancient dancing, whatever. And I remember I would go into those classes and always felt so out of place, like so out of place. And like it's interesting. I think when children of like immigrant parents, they either like try to fit in with the culture and immerse themselves completely in the culture, or like try to be a bit more white, I guess. And I grew up in a very like white suburb. My high school was predominantly white, and maybe I never consciously did it, but perhaps looking back on it, it was maybe a subconscious thing, just to maybe remove myself from my culture a bit, just to sort of fit in. Yeah, I never actively thought of it. Looking back, I feel like I probably did.
And it's kind of sad. But when you mentioned like they didn't consider you Indian, it's interesting because then what is Indian, like, and what is Chinese or what is whatever? Like, there shouldn't be a definition of what you consider yourself.
There's a really good, I don't know, have you guys read Trevor Noah's book? In his book, Trevor Noah, like the comedian, I don't know if people know him, his book is incredible. So it's an autobiography, a mixed race child growing up in South Africa, and he describes how, this is really interesting, he says how in South Africa the Japanese were considered black. Like the white people called the Japanese black, however the Chinese were Asians. And he made that point to demonstrate how arbitrary race is, and it's literally predominantly what white people say what it is. You know, it's a made up concept, and that analogy really, not analogy, it was obviously anecdote. That made me really understand race to a greater degree, that it really is arbitrary. Like, if Japanese people were considered white in, you know, pre-apartheid South Africa, that is really interesting. But their neighbours, China, is considered
yeah,
Asian.
yeah.
So, yeah.
That was like when I went to Europe. They considered Asian like
Indians?
Indians
Yes.
and Pakistani
Yes.
people.
In the
Yeah.
UK, Asian means
Yeah.
Pakistani, Bangladeshi.
And I was like, what do you call East Asian people, like Chinese, Japanese, Korean? And they were like, we just call them Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. And
Yeah.
I was like, that's so weird. Because in Australia, Asian means
100%.
every kind of
100%.
Asian.
Yeah. Maybe it's like the predominant culture is what
It's
they-
that is why.
I think that's
yeah.
why they like group it into
Yeah,
one.
but when I went to Europe, there was like
Mm.
there were no East Asian people apart from like the stereotypical tourists, like the busloads of Chinese people.
Yeah.
It actually did make me feel kind of out of place. Even though I don't have
Sure.
many Asian friends in Melbourne, seeing someone like you just makes you feel more comfortable.
Mm.
But then like you, when I went to China, I was like, I do not relate to people here like at all. Like my dad's I only speak Chinese for one, but
Yeah.
I did not relate to them at all, and it just made me feel more Australian and less
100%.
Chinese.
And you are considered Australian over there.
Oh yeah, which is
You're-
100% valid.
You are
yeah.
considered. You're not considered. I wasn't considered Indian. I was honestly considered Australian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Made me feel kind of like weird though. Like, well, shouldn't this still be a part of my life, kind of thing? But
Yeah, and I think I had the idea that I would sort of blend in. I was like, yeah, I'm looking forward to sort of blending in. Yeah, maybe people know like people's energies and they know they're not from there.
even the way you dress,
Just
would
the
be
way
a
you-
major thing.
exactly,
Yeah.
and-
Even my hair being curly, they were like, "What the hell?" Is
Yeah,
wrong
they
with you?"
just knew I wasn't from there. Yeah.
Well, you've been like, because your background is Greek, Dino. I know you didn't, when you went back to Greece, did you want to learn more about your roots, or you weren't interested?
Weren't interested?
No,
How come?
my mum's from Croatia. My dad's from
Ah.
Greece.
All right, sorry.
So both
Are they
like
rivalry?
no,
No,
no, no,
okay. No, sorry.
no. It's a common mistake because
Yeah.
that area is all just constantly like infighting.
Yeah.
As well.
It's Serbia and Croatia, right?
Yeah.
It had like history, yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yep.
it's just like both of them are like Mediterranean countries,
Yeah.
and they're fine to visit.
Mhm.
And my dad's super into like Greek culture and stuff.
Mhm.
I can't get myself to be interested in it. It's
Yeah.
basically like everything but those two places.
Yeah.
Because they just seem boring to me.
It's interesting because with each generation of immigrants or refugees, there's always like a wave of racism, and because yours came a lot before you were born, I don't know how many do you know how many generations you're?
One. My mum
Oh,
and
you're
dad.
one.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting
Ah.
because usually it'd be a bit further back. So first generation is when you're born in the country, right?
Wait.
That's right.
Is that
Second
right?
gen. The
Oh.
second gen. I thought first gen is when.
I thought first gen was when you were born.
The term first generation immigrant refers to the very first immigrants or to the children of an immigrant.
Yeah,
So both.
Oh, both.
Yeah, so it's
so
like
we're-
so if you came here,
Mm.
you are like say you came from I don't know, Turkey.
Yeah.
Yeah. You would be a first generation immigrant.
Oh, okay.
But also if you were born here,
you're also a first.
You're also a
generation.
first
That's
generation
so
immigrant.
confusing. So we're all first
First gen-
generation technically.
Damn. Okay, then I said second gen earlier. I'm wrong.
So we're first. I think it's interesting that you and I both have such this complex of finding our background, our roots.
yeah.
Whereas I think someone like Dino, it's kind of like more of a privilege because he's white and European, and their
Mm.
roots are very much still like it's comfortably Australian.
can I give you a fact though?
Mhm.
Apparently, second generation immigrant, the phrase, the term, is an oxymoron because a second generation immigrant is not actually an immigrant.
Ah,
You know what I mean? They haven't migrated anywhere.
So contradictory.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's us, isn't it?
That's us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's all of us.
That's all of us. Yeah.
Like, do you feel content with the balance you have with like us being Australian and having your Indian background?
Yes, I can confidently say that
Yeah, you
now.
can.
Yes, because especially with my Indian heritage, I think, like I said, I used to feel quite jarred with it because I was like, there's so many things wrong with it. It's not all yoga and spiritual enlightenment and yummy food. There's a lot that needs improvement in the country.
Mm.
It's happening slowly, not nearly as fast enough, but it is what it is. But I can honestly say I'm pretty comfortable with the dual sort of identity. Yeah.
No, it's really nice.
Yeah,
to hear.
yeah. I know. And it didn't come from that trip. It honestly came from like the reflection that I did after the trip.
Yeah.
If anything, after that trip, I felt more confused and more sort of like, geez, this is kind of not what I expected. Yeah.
Oh,
if-
okay.
If
nice.
anything, it was more. I would say like only like of recently have I sort of. I'm really happy with that sort of dual identity. Yeah.
Oh, okay, nice.
Mm.
No, that's really good to hear.
Yeah. Do you associate with your roots as much, Dino?
Nope,
Yeah.
nothing at all.
Yeah.
I don't. I
Yeah.
can care less.
It's Quinlan's Queer Conundrum.
So, Quinlan, what is your conundrum for this week?
Well, my conundrum is, what does home mean to us, or what is home to us? So I thought it was an interesting concept because we were talking about traveling, and a lot of us try to like escape home, and then we obviously end up coming back. It's kind of like, well, what is home? Like, because especially with our generation, a lot of us are traveling, and a lot of our identity is on the internet. I just wanted to explore that a bit, and I kind of looked into an article. So the Pew Research Center conducted a survey of 2,260 American adults, and they asked basically, what do you consider home? I don't know what they wrote here. It was 38% said they don't identify the place where they're currently living, 26% said where they were born or raised, and then 18% identified it as where they had lived the longest, and the last 15% said where they were educated, like where they went to high school or primary school. And I thought that was really interesting because everyone has a different kind of definition.
Do you have home, Quinlan? Where's your home?
Oh, no, because there's a lot of different ways. Like sometimes, like that quote, that stupid quote, a home is a person kind of thing. So that could mean your family or it could mean a romantic partner, which is kind of dangerous in itself. I think home is like where you're accepted, and it's somewhere where you can always go back to no matter what happens, no matter what you do. That's what my kind of definition would be. Or like, I guess when all of us move out one day, well, you've just moved out, Katana, but Dino and I live at home. When we move out, like, I wonder how long it's going to take for us to feel at home in that new apartment or that new house or even the new city that we moved to. Like, how do you feel right now with where you've moved?
Oh, honestly, I feel a bit displaced. Like, I love where I'm living, so I'm living with 2 uni friends. I think you're just, especially living at home for this long and then moving out, you just miss the familiarity of it. Yeah, it's literally that, just like hearing your mum's footsteps in the morning or hearing the dog bark or hearing my sister get ready for school.
What's the thing that you miss the most about home?
Honestly, it's like I said, it's like really like weird things, like hearing people's footsteps and hearing my dog bark at like randoms walking across the street. I miss my mum's cooking the most. So yeah, honestly, it's that. And also I feel like another thing that people don't talk about is like this sense of loneliness too that comes with it, because even if you're not interacting with your family members as much when you're at home, it's just the presence of people in the house. And all my housemates, they're all working or studying, so no one's ever home. Like, we have very different schedules, so no one's ever home. When you're at home, it's usually just you. Spoken to friends who've moved out also, and they totally like resonate with that, like an aspect of loneliness. And yeah, you're busy, but even when you go home and it's like, you know, hour before bed, you still feel lonely. Yeah,
because when I was traveling as well, even though I was in a hostel which is full of people, like at one point I was in an 18-bed room.
Wow.
I know, that was
18.
really overwhelming. Yeah, that was in London. Even though I was surrounded by people, I still missed my family, which is what I was not missing my family before I left for Europe. I was like, I want to get out of here. Like, it's really overwhelming. But traveling for that long, I was like, it like you said, it really made me appreciate living at home and having that trust with somewhat trust, like trust with my family, and
It's
like
a safety
hearing.
net.
And it's really like, there's so many things you don't worry about living at home that just makes it like that special place in your heart. I feel like dinner, bills is a big thing.
Bills,
Like my
yes.
dad, we all distribute chores, so even like my dad does the laundry and he mops, and then I have my own stuff. Like, you don't get that when you live by yourself as well.
So can we say that your home is your literal home right now?
Right now, yeah, I don't know, I guess so. And I think I find home in my family, because if we moved house, obviously I'm not gonna be like, I don't have a home anymore, even though I'm with my family still. Like, so I think that's a big thing. But I was also going to talk about international students and the ones that are thinking about living in Australia. I have asked them before. I'm like, so, like, what do you consider your home if, like, basically you have a whole new life here, but all your family's back in, like, China or Japan or India, like, wherever you come from? And usually they can't answer the question because it's like, quite complicated for them. And I think that's another privilege that we have as well, like, growing up in a country that's lucky enough to have all the benefits we have. It's like some people don't like where they come from, but it's still their home because it's where they've grown up.
100%.
So I find that really interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah, kind of finding a new place or having half of your identity in another place. What about you, Dino? What's home for you?
Home is where I am. I just float about. I've never lived anywhere else besides my house that I live in
Yeah.
right now. So it's all just there.
Did you miss your family when you traveled?
No. No. I mean, I didn't travel. It's 2 weeks. It's not
Yeah.
a huge amount. It's not like 2 months. But, I mean, who would do that? That's just insane. Um,
Whoopsies. But one of the articles said a lot of people find home in online communities. And you've mentioned that before, like people who are stuck at home, like who have a disability, they'll find a community on the internet. And that can also become your home, like connecting with other people, which is interesting. It's not even a place, it's an online forum.
World of Warcraft is so many people's homes.
I feel like it actually is,
It
like as
is.
funny as it sounds.
No, it is.
Yeah.
People love World of Warcraft.
How weird is that, though? Like all your friends, like, and you probably call them your family.
Yeah, but they'd be so much better. Like, in real life, nobody is wearing shoulder pads with, like, spikes on
In the
ends of
80s.
them. In the 80s, yes. But today, no. But in World of Warcraft, everyone is having them. Some people are orcs. There's no orcs in real life.
Yeah.
She's agreeing with me.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't
Did
know.
you play World of
No,
Warcraft?
I know. I'm just agreeing to be polite. I have no idea what's going
I
on.
definitely never played that game, just to put it out there.
I just never played. I think I played Neopets, and that's about it.
But Neopets was your home for a while, was
I don't
it
know.
not?
It made me insecure.
Wait,
'Cause
what?
You know those kids that would have like 100,000 points,
Yeah.
and I would only have like 100. I was not. That just was not my jam.
You were not privileged.
And I was like, fuck this game.
Do you
I'm
know,
like 10 years old. Yeah.
do you know what's the best, though, about Neopets?
What?
Is that your Neopet could have a pet of its own.
Yeah. That was sick. That was sick. Yeah.
This is strange. I never really played Neopets.
I played The Sims. That was like my.
I
probably
played
my
The
number one jam.
Sims.
Yeah,
Make
that
a
was
family
fun.
and you murder them.
Murder them, or like you like torture them.
Yes.
If they really need to pee.
Locking him in the kitchen and putting it on
Kitchen,
fire.
Or like you just remove the toilet. And
Oh
they're
wait,
like-
you put him in the pool and you get rid of a ladder?
Yeah. Yes.
Dino's face.
Yes.
Me and my friend, we made celebrities. We like Taylor Swift, like Miley Cyrus, Rihanna, and we bet on who was gonna live the longest in the kitchen. It was on fire.
That was so funny.
It's so funny.
I would always like kiss someone in front of someone that was like meant to be paired with, and then they'd like slap each other and get all like feisty. Anyway.
Cause psychological damage to these poor
Yeah.
sim people.
You're making fun of World of Warcraft players, and then you're just like committing genocide to celebrities.
They deserve it. No, I'm joking. We sound like crazy people.
As if people didn't do that.
Everyone did it,
The
right?
Sims was like, yeah, and then you just like run over people for fun. And
Yeah.
It's just fun. It's,
I liked watching the Grim Reaper come and take
yeah,
them.
that was cool.
What is home to you?
Well, actually, did you know, folks, that there is a global backlash to tourism around the world?
No.
I have not heard about it, but can I make a wild guess?
Go for it.
Is it because of climate change and like the emissions released by planes? So there's like
We're going to become Greta and get
Yeah.
yachts everywhere.
yeah.
We're all going to become
Because I've
Greta.
already had friends being like, I don't think I can travel. I can justify travel if it's like a 2-week holiday. Like if I were to go overseas, it'd have to be like
Worth it.
worth
Yeah.
it in a couple of months because I can't justify
Yeah,
the
because
fuel
planes
emissions.
cause the most
So
air
that's my
pollution.
guess, but I haven't heard of it.
I hadn't heard about that. It makes sense, but I hadn't heard of that. No, this is where certain cities are pushing back against tourists, where they've become overrun with tourists, and they've decided that no more. It's become our cities are becoming unlivable, and we're not going to take it anymore. The best example of these are Venice and Barcelona. So both
Yeah.
European cities.
Really?
Because, especially with Venice, there's only so much land, right? There's about 100,000 people who live in Venice, and they get millions of tourists
Oh
every
God,
year.
Yeah, when I went there, it was.
There are way more tourists who live there at any one moment than there are people who actually live in Venice.
Right.
Whoa.
And so there have been protests, and they've been trying to get, for example, Airbnb. Barcelona has banned Airbnb.
I heard about that.
Barcelona? How come? I didn't know it
Because
was
they want
that
less
popular.
tourists. I don't know if that'll work though.
So what's happening in Barcelona and throughout like a bunch of cities, a bunch of global cities around the world, is that people who own land, landlords, are turning their apartments from long-term leases into short-term Airbnbs. They get a lot more money that way. They don't have to have as many like leasing requirements when you're renting.
Yes.
And so that's kicking people out of their homes, which means
Ah.
there's just less homes available to them, so they have to move.
Right.
So basically, these big global touristy cities like Venice, like Barcelona, are basically just becoming hot, like just turning into tourist cities. And the people who still live there are trying to fight back. So they are. Japan is one of these places where they've already said Airbnb is going to be super regulated. They basically just have to become tiny little hotels, right?
Ah.
And that's one way because there's just not that many places for people to live. And
Yeah.
Japan is different, but in these other cities, they're just like, no more. We're going to kick them out.
Well, didn't Amsterdam do the whole? They removed that red Amsterdam sign, the blocks. They removed it because people were just. It was inundated with just people trying to take photos, and
Oh wow.
I think it drove the city crazy, and they got rid of it. Yeah, the actual council
Damn.
got rid of it. Yeah.
And Amsterdam's another city because, like, when you go to Amsterdam, you've been to Amsterdam, yeah?
I have not.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you go
It's
to,
a crazy place.
it's amazing.
I mean, I passed through it.
Yeah.
But yeah, and even passing through it,
It's
just the
beautiful.
waft of just weed in the air.
Yeah.
I like, because our bus stopped through, and I was like, whoa.
It's so pungent.
It's
Fuck
so-
me.
It's gross. It's really
It's
gross.
strong.
But Amsterdam is not like a high density city. Like there aren't that many people who live in the city because it's like low level housing and like it's all kind of spread out. So which means that there aren't that many houses available to people. So they want to kick Airbnb out as much as possible
Right.
and just turn it back into housing.
Right.
Yeah. Well, interesting enough, my friend who's living in Venice right now as a student, shout out to Matteo, but he told me that they were doing a tourist tax in Venice. So if you wanted to go to the island, you had to pay money if you were going to spend more than a day there, I think, I'm pretty sure. So it's deterring people to go, which he found kind of silly because he has to go there to work. So it doesn't... But yeah, so they are doing a lot of regulating and a lot of strategic moves, I suppose, to get people to not go. But that's interesting because they rely so much on tourism for money, like especially Venice, Amsterdam. Like what else do they have for their economy?
Exactly. So they're trying to have this balancing act where they want to have tourists, but to have them more regulated. Because tourism isn't like, it's global, but there are certain hotspots where most people go to. There aren't that many people who go to like Kazakhstan, right? Kazakhstan is not the it place yet. Most of these are going to like European cities or like, you know, if you were to visit America, you're not going to Pennsylvania. You're going to New York, LA, Washington, maybe Las Vegas. Like there are certain places and it's just too much for people.
So they're trying to make the other cities touristy as well.
Doing that, like,
That's interesting. The thing is, I guess people don't have enough time either to go to the lesser known places.
And it also just puts, like, because there's so many people, it puts strain on everything else. So, like the tourist tax, right? With something like Venice or Barcelona, it overwhelms their public transport networks. So, like...
cities are not built for that capacity.
Exactly. Like, Japan is going through this at the moment, especially like Tokyo. Like, Tokyo is... there are millions of people who live in Tokyo, but even then... And their public transport system is excellent. But even then, they're still struggling because there's so many more people... Like, you see this on your Instagram feed. So many people are in Japan at the moment.
And they'll be used soon. I guess this is an environmental thing as well, like the amount of rubbish that people, like, just chuck.
How was Venice? We didn't
Venice
go
was
to...
really clean.
Clean? It was clean.
I found it clean. Well, I follow an Instagrammer on... I follow an Instagrammer on Instagram. But he's
Wait.
Whoa.
Run without throwing it. An Instagrammer on Instagram.
I know, right? Crazy concept. But he's an environmental Instagram poster. He cycles everywhere. He's cycling around Europe at the moment. I think because I was in the touristy areas, I didn't see rubbish. But then he went to a place where it wasn't touristy, and he took a picture of the rubbish that was in the river, or the canal, sorry, and it looked bad. But he's like, apart from like, they have a good regulation of how to get rid of it because it's canals. It's quite easy. You put a net out and you kind of take it. But then all that rubbish, if it doesn't get caught, it'll go out into the ocean as well. So it is pretty bad.
Yeah.
And there's people disrespecting. Like you can kind of see the wear and tear on Venice because of everyone walking around and taking photos and touching things. Like when something's touched over and over, especially if it's like an old church, it wears everything down.
Interesting.
That is interesting. Yeah, I didn't know a lot about
Guessing
that.
a lot of Asian countries would be on board with that too.
Oh my God, China. Oh, the amount of freaking rubbish when I was on the Great Wall was ridiculous.
Yeah.
It was really sad.
I mean, China really wants like a giant tourism
They do,
industry.
yeah.
Right.
Katana and I were talking about this before, but some countries, I think the tourism is affected by political issues. It's interesting with China because the whole Hong Kong thing is happening now, like that political war, and I think people are being deterred from going there. Even Hong Kong relies on tourism, but because of all the protests, no one can even get in or out of Hong Kong, which is crazy. So it's interesting when you like dig deeper on whether like you should go to a country if you do proper research or not, like to support that government or to support that tourism industry.
Exactly.
But yeah.
Missing someone.
Thank you everyone for listening to the podcast today. Thank you to our special guest Katana for filling in for JJ and also giving us insight into your story. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thank you Dino.
You're welcome.
He was basically tech support today. It took us a while to figure out the bips and bobs of that soundboard or something because JJ is usually the wizard of all of that. He's the DJ.
It's a DJ.
Yeah, thank you to the listener as well for supporting us. And you can find us on Instagram at 2halfgays, Facebook. So make sure to follow us. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Next.